My name's Tim. I'm the founder of Pandora. I started the company 9.5 years ago. The service that you all know of as Pandora launched in November of 2005. We became a consumer-facing website in November of 2005. But we've actually been working on the product a lot longer than that. I founded the company in January of 2000 and began work on this thing called the Music Genome Project, which is what powers Pandora. I know I'm giving a talk now. I'm giving a talk in the evening, and I know that a lot of you are going to be there, so you have to forgive me if some of what I say now will get repeated. But I want to try and give you sort of a bit of a snapshot of Pandora as a company, as a product, and then also talk about sort of the context that we operate in now, sort of this very, very fast-moving digital music world. I encourage you at any point to ask questions. So if there's something that you don't understand, or there's a topic that you want me to dive into in more detail, or something I'm not talking about that you're curious about, I'm more than happy to kind of follow your lead. I suspect you guys have different areas of interest, whether it's the music side or technology or marketing or whatnot. And I'm happy to kind of interact with you about this. So don't be shy about raising your hand at any point, and I'll just follow your lead. Quickly, how many people here are actual musicians? Wow. Okay, that's great. It's not very often that many people in an audience are musicians. I guess we're in New Orleans, though. So I'm a musician myself. I graduated from Stanford in '88. I wasn't a music major. I studied actually poli-sci at Stanford, political science. I did that because poli-sci was Stanford's shortest major. So I could do a whole bunch of things and not worry about getting my requirements out of the way, because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was a student. When I got out of college, I knew I wanted to get involved with music, but I didn't know how. So I took sort of a series of part-time jobs and really kind of dove into not only performance. I studied jazz piano with a fellow from Berkeley and spent 6 or 7 hours a day playing piano for a few years, thinking that I would really become the next Oscar Peterson. Also really got familiar with sort of the intersection of computers and music, which I had an interest in college. Spent a bunch of years trying to make a living as a musician, which is no picnic. But the experiences I had playing in bands for a long time, and then as a film composer for a while, which is where Kevin and I crossed paths a long time ago, the inspiration for this company grew out of those collective experiences. On the one hand, seeing this huge sea of talented but invisible musicians all around the country that I played music with and saw, and I thought, wow, these people ought to be able to make a living more easily than this. And then as a film composer, thinking a lot about musicology and music taste, and why people like what they like, and how music works in film scores. And film composing, I'm sure some of you have done this, is a very sort of deliberate, calculating form of composition, and you really you break music down into sort of its component parts. So the Music Genome Project really grew out of those experiences, and I had the idea in sort of late '99 to marry that with the web and build what we thought was going to be a recommendation tool. So we actually initially envisioned this as a big database of information that we would license out to various retailers and websites and portals who needed technologies like ours to help their customers navigate sort of these massive online music repositories. And we pointed the company sort of in that direction. Spent about 5 years building this core database. In 2005, after having not done much on the business side, those 5 years were pretty lean for us, we decided to completely change direction as a company and go from being a licensor of technology to becoming a website, a consumer-facing website. And we decided to repurpose this genome into radio and solve what we thought was a pretty substantial problem and a big opportunity in radio. And essentially, excuse me, that slide was meant to come. So the bulk of radio listening is broadcast radio. So the historical mechanism for radio is just one playlist that gets broadcast to lots of people simultaneously. So there's one set of songs, and as listeners, you have the choice, and I don't know how many stations New Orleans has, but maybe half a dozen stations, and you pick which one you want to listen to. That's been the historical model for radio. I think the single biggest technological change that has hit the music industry is the shift from broadcast, where it's one-to-many, into what people call unicast. You may have heard this term thrown around. Unicast is what you guys have all grown up with, which is, via the web, you get an individual stream of music. So radio, that used to be this one-to-many, now is one-to-one. So when you log on to Pandora, you create your radio station, it streams that just to you. And furthermore, as a listener, you can interact with it. So you can give it thumbs. You can kind of shape the listening experience as you go. Those are two pretty radical departures from radio. And it has profound implications for just about every aspect of the music industry because, for starters, as a listener, you can find music on the radio that you like. And for most people, that gets harder and harder as you get older. And for musicians also, in a unicast world, services like Pandora can accommodate a much, much broader catalog of music. I mean, the whole record industry, for its entire history, has been built around one pretty simple objective, which is to get music on the radio. For decades past, if you wanted to build a career as a musician, the answer was get the backing of a big record label that has the clout and the money and the muscle to get you on broadcast radio. And then you get blasted out across these huge networks that are generally owned by a small number of big holding companies. And through this sort of mass promotional channel, build up hits. That's historically been the music industry. And so everything organizes around that. You have record labels that are kind of the kingmakers, and you have this huge sea of artists trying to bang on the door and get in to one of these small number of labels so they can get on radio. If you can't get through that door, your only alternative is to get in a van and drive around and try and build up a grassroots following, which is, exhausting and generally fruitless. So we looked at, it was sort of late 99, 2000, when internet radio was really beginning to kind of take shape. 2004, when internet radio was starting to get broad penetration because broadband had become pretty ubiquitous. Most people had high-speed access into home and the office. And so internet streaming had become a real reality. And so we decided, look, we're going to take this thing we'd built, the Music Genome Project, and repurpose it into radio. So this change, I think you'll find, is going to fundamentally alter the business. And I think it has strong implications, not just for musicians, but any of you that are interested in getting into the business side of music. It opens up all sorts of really interesting opportunities because this is no longer going to be a business run by 4 major labels. It's going to be a huge cottage industry of entrepreneurial promoters and marketers and managers who understand how these online tools work and can help artists take advantage of them. And you now have access through unicasting to mass promotion. So I think as you guys dive more into music, you'll begin to see this, and I think it really shapes, I think it's shaping the career opportunities pretty substantially for everyone that wants to get involved in music. So I'm going to back up here. If you came to Pandora's offices, this is what you'd see. We have about now 40 musicians that work for us. And their job every day is to come in, put some headphones on, and listen to songs. And they do that 5-6 hours a day. And when they listen to those tunes, what they're actually doing is a trained musician, so typically graduates of music school. You have to have a really good background in music theory to do this. They listen to songs and analyze them one by one along close to 400 musical attributes per song. So they actually detail every granular piece of musical information for every song. I'll actually show you what they look at. Forgive the slide order here. So this is one of, you can see, 7 pages of musical detail that the analysts score for every song. On your way here. It's completely ludicrous as an approach. it takes 15 minutes to do a 3-minute pop song. And it might take as much as 2 hours to do a symphony. But what these fellows, women and men, are doing is going through one by one, and you can see the little scores, they're scoring these attributes. The idea is that when you're done, you've essentially captured the musical DNA of the song. So you could actually look at our kind of organizing principle was that you could lay out these 7 pages of musical detail, these 400 attributes, and look at them, and you could hear the song in your head. Every dimension, the harmonic content, the use of voice and vocal harmony, all the instruments, what they're doing, their role, all the rhythmic components. And just as an example, this left-hand column here, these are all attributes designed to capture the melody. So what's going on, whether it's some kind of very drone-like repetitive melody or something much more improvisational and acrobatic like you might see in an R&B song. And all these attributes collectively describe the melody. So these, you use the same attributes, but you give different scores to capture different styles of melody, kind of like musical primary colors. So when you're done, you have the equivalent of a musical fingerprint. So when you type a song into Pandora, what actually happens is we calculate musical proximity. So we actually look at the hundreds of thousands of songs in our collection and compute the aggregate distance between these numbers across all these attributes. And then we start sequencing them into playlists. So we are essentially trying to find musical neighbors and use that to build playlists. And then as you interact with it, with your thumbs up, thumbs down, and people love to give thumbs on Pandora. We have about 3 billion thumbs up, thumbs down feedback since we launched the service. As you thumb these songs as they go by, it learns. So it actually tries to deduce from the feedback you're giving it what you mean by that. So if you thumb down 4 songs in a row that all have a pretty heavy use of chromatic harmony, the station will start to reduce the use of chromatic harmony in that station. It's meant to sort of replicate, like we all have our friend who's a music genius. Maybe some of you are this person for your friends. You have an encyclopedic knowledge of music, and the more feedback that person gets from their friend, the better they get at giving recommendations. That's what Pandora is trying to do. And there are a few really important characteristics of this approach. One is, of course, the ability to personalize and do it quickly. And the second is to be able to take this feedback and translate it into musicology. So if we all launched a station with, Neutral Milk Hotel, within a couple hours, we would actually be listening to a different station, different playlist, because based on our thumb feedback, we've sort of said, this is kind of what we like about Neutral Milk Hotel versus somebody else. So it's sort of you're curating this on the fly. So you get that advantage. And the third one, which kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier, we're making connections here just based on musicology. So it's the one form of recommendation that's not a popularity contest. So if one of you had a brand new band and you cut your first CD and you send it to Pandora, we're able to connect that album or those songs with other like-sounding songs, even though we know nothing about you, like there's no purchase history behind you, you haven't been part of some kind of social network, there's no sort of pre-existing listening or thumb data, which is what you would need to be recommended on a site like Amazon. So when you go to all these online retailers like Amazon, they'll say, hey, you like this CD? People who like this also like this. You've seen those recommendation tools. That's called collaborative filtering. And what it's essentially doing is, if you're going to buy a record, that doesn't happen a whole lot these days, but if you're going to buy a record, the statistical engine will look at that record you're about to purchase and see anybody else who's bought that record, what's the next most popular CD among that crowd, and recommend that to you. Well, if you're a brand new band, that doesn't work for you because no one's bought you yet. So on Pandora, we solved that problem by understanding the musicology of it. And so we're building underneath this thing. My slides are out of order, I'm sorry. I'm going to skip back. I'm going to ruin all this for you and then come back to it. Oh, hell's bells. I think I put the wrong presentation up here. Dang. Shoot. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to paint a picture for you. So in our collection, we have 70,000 artists now. And we have about 650,000 songs in the collection. Of those 70,000 artists, 70% of them are not on a label. So it's mostly independent music. And of those 650 songs in our collection, about 95% play every day on some number of stations. So if you think back to that Unicast, that broadcast to Unicast transformation, like, we're blasting out over 600,000 songs a day to tens of millions of people. And most of this is music that's never played on radio before. So I think the implications for the industry, and I think this is really how it's changing, is that it's going from, a really narrow funnel that accommodates maybe a couple dozen hit artists a year to something that's just much more wide open. It's delivering personalized streams to you, and those streams are full of music that doesn't get played on radio. In the entire history of broadcast radio, since it started, less than 100,000 songs have ever played on radio in its entire history. It tells you something about how consolidated radio is. How many of you listen here to music on broadcast radio? Yeah, like nobody. And that is really, I think, what's this. If I was in the radio business and I saw that, I'd be worried. But I think that's a really telling. That fact is shaping the music industry. And you guys are all going to alternative mechanisms. You're going to, iPods, and I'm sure none of you do any file sharing, so probably don't do that. But all the different forms of listening that you have, where you can really have much more control over what you're listening to. And Pandora is really trying to sort of position itself right in the middle of that. Any questions going more along here? Yeah.
I wanted to know about the scaling system. Is it only one person, or do they go through several different people?
That's a really good question. So the songs are all analyzed by one person, but we do 10% of the songs twice. So as a blind kind of sort of test, quality analysis, we'll duplicate analyze songs and compare scores. So we're always tracking to see if everybody has the exact same idea of how much vibrato Mariah Carey uses, and which is a lot. Before you start this analysis, an analyst goes through about 100 hours of training just for the very beginning, just to get a very solid consensus over what each attribute means, and on a scale of 1 to 10, what corresponds to each score. So we kind of pound the individuality out of our analysts before they start working, so they all have the same notion of what these scores mean. It's a challenge, though, of human systems. Yeah.
Similar to like a lot of independent artists and stuff like that, they try to get on iTunes. And I noticed that you were talking about how like a lot of independent artists are on Pandora. How exactly, like, what process do you go through in order to get on the Pandora right now?
Yeah. So the music that we get comes from a bunch of different sources. One is direct submissions, and those will come from everything from hobbyists, recordings they did on the weekend, all the way over to the new releases from big major labels. So direct submissions. We get submissions from listeners or suggestions from listeners, so folks will actually write us and say, hey, I was downtown last night and saw this great new band, you should check them out for Pandora. Or we also monitor the searches of people on Pandora. So as you guys type in songs and artists to launch stations, we're kind of keeping an eye on that. And if you start searching for an artist that we don't have, we know right away. So if some artist seems to pop up regularly, we'll go out and check it out. And then we do our own research. So we actually have a couple of people whose full-time job is just to look for music. And all that bolus of music comes in through our front doors. We have just overflowing boxes, our inbox. And we listen to it all, and we add the best stuff. And that's a somewhat subjective decision. But the only criteria for inclusion is quality. And about 30% of what we receive goes in. And we treat it all equally. So we get CDs sent to us that are like freshly burned CD-ROMs, the track titles written in Sharpie on them. And if that's good, it'll go in. We'll actually create a UPC code for it and enroll it. So.
I've tried to use Pandora like internationally and it doesn't work. I like once I tried it from like my country and it didn't work and I was like, oh.
Rats. Yeah, so Pandora operates under a federal license. So that there's a piece of federal legislation called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. That is, it's the framework that we use. It gives us the license to play all the music in Pandora, but it only grants us that right to residents sitting in the U.S. So people have to be sitting at a computer in the U.S. There is no equivalent license to do that in any other country in the world. So if we went to Brazil or we went to France, we'd have to get individual licenses from all the rights holders, country by country. And so for the time being, we're just streaming in the US. Our hope, though, is we can take the licensing structure we have here and just replicate it elsewhere. The problem is that labels are being pretty tough right now on licenses, both here and internationally. So we actually, when we launched Pandora, for the first year of the service, you could access it from overseas, and friends of yours might have been able to access it a couple years ago. And all you had to do was type in a zip code and to pretend you were in the US. Our most popular zip code for the first year was 90210. It's true. And after a year, we started blocking listeners. So we actually had to block people about a year in. So since then, we've been unavailable, which is painful, but we were threatened with lawsuits, so yeah.
Yeah, can you go over the sort of the nature of those, I don't mean to like get dark on it or anything, like the nature of like the legal obstacles, I guess, that you
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm always curious like what they're trying to pull next.
I like that expression, let's get dark on it a little bit here. All right, let's go to the dark side. So this federal license, so it's a piece of law in the Federal Register, grants us the right to play all the music that we play on Pandora without getting any direct permission. So if any of you was in a band and you published a CD, made it available for sale, we have the right to play it and you can't even stop us. And we don't even have to ask your permission. Because this law is what's called a compulsory license. Their musicians are compelled to license their content to folks like us without our needing to get permission. There's a lot of virtues in that, one of which is it allows us to put your music in. So we don't have to go track down every artist to get permission for every piece of music. Even if they wanted to license it to us, we wouldn't be able to do that. It would be too time consuming. So it's a great, efficient way to get music in. So it provides access, and it provides a bunch of sort of guidelines around what we can and can't do as a webcaster. Like you can only skip 6 songs an hour, you can't rewind, you can't hear songs on demand, stuff like that. It also mandates that we pay what's called a performance fee for every song that we stream. So every 5 years, per this Digital Millennium Copyright Act, a 3-judge panel meets in Washington and determines how much we're going to pay per song for the ensuing 5 years. So every 5 years, the license we pay gets sort of arbitrated and recalculated. And the dark side arrived in March of '07 when this arbitration panel ruled and just came up with a wildly irrational answer for that 5-year period. And it essentially was going to put us out of business because it made it too expensive for us to deliver Pandora. And we appealed the process through this Copyright Office. We appealed to record labels and rights holders, neither of whom were interested in helping us out. And we appealed to the federal appeals process, but that takes years, and Pandora wouldn't last that long. So we were stuck, and we actually had a board meeting where the topic was when we were going to pull the plug on Pandora because we had broken our business model. And rather than shut down, we decided to organize a big political campaign. And we emailed our listeners and asked them to call Congress, call their congressional representatives, or fax them, and protest this hike. And this was in the summer of '07. And the day after we sent that, in 3 days, Washington received 400,000 faxes from Pandora listeners. Eventually got over 2 million people who called, wrote, or faxed their representatives, which is more feedback than they got on the Iraq War. Excuse me, don't just fuck with someone's radio. I mean, you know, you can go start wars and whatever, but don't mess with my radio station. So, in spite of our misguided priorities as a nation, we were perfectly happy, of course. The public opposition was so overwhelming and so intense that Congress actually intervened, and a bill was introduced that quickly accumulated sponsors, about 150 sponsors in a matter of weeks, which is completely unprecedented in Washington. That just never happens there. We had hired some lobbyists to help us organize this, and they said they'd never seen anything like this before. I was on Capitol Hill walking through Congress, meeting with senators and representatives, and it was called Hillwalking. One of the things that we learned is that, you know, every member of Congress has a staff, typically 15 to 20 people who are sometimes college students there for the summer, or, you know, recent college grads. They're all big Pandora fans all across the Hill. So we had the great no trouble accessing representatives because the staffers wanted to meet. And the staffers are the one who really determine legislation. But wound up getting a bill introduced, and Congress essentially forced a renegotiation of the rates, which were just about to settle. So after like a 2-year and really kind of grueling negotiation, we're going to come out and into the light again. But it was a very challenging thing, it was just raw grassroots political pressure. Like this was like MoveOn.org. You know, this happened because and only because there was this huge public outcry, and it's really amazing to think that, you know, even a few years ago, the idea that there'd be some small arcane change in a piece of copyright law in an industry that's very well lobbied. I mean, the IAAA, which that organizes the big record labels, very sophisticated lobbying machine in Washington, have been pushing this for a while. Like the idea that you could organize enough people to get upset about that, to call, to turn it back, is really extraordinary. And I think it's, you know, that sort of grassroots, that ability to mobilize and sort of consolidate power is, I think, a really important part of public life, and will be in the coming years. So we were the beneficiaries of it. Yeah.
I was reading a while ago that you guys started introducing more ads
Mm-hmm.
and all your stuff. Is that because of all this licensing stuff?
They're definitely connected. We've always intended to run audio advertising. It's never going to be what you hear on commercial radio, so it'll be really modest compared, you know, like 15-second ads, maybe a couple an hour or something like that. The need to do it is exacerbated by the licensing fees, for sure. And the form of advertising, you know, Pandora is used not just on computers, but on phones and so on now. And when people are driving, and in that environment, you need to use audio more than visual, because you don't want someone like looking at your ad when they're driving the car. So it'll be part of our solution, but the rates make it worse, for sure.
Is that where all your revenue comes from? Just ads?
Advertising, yeah. We're all advertising supported. Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just because I'm a novice musician, but I find it's particularly hard.
Yes, it is.
To meet musicians and, you know, non-musical listeners, and I can imagine the majority of listeners.
I'm sorry, it's hard to do what?
It's hard to if let me just backtrack for a second. If the people who are the paid listeners to your music are highly trained and sophisticated musicians,
Right.
Have you ever had or experienced sort of like a schism, I guess, between what they're writing about
Right.
and what the listener is intending? I mean,
Right.
certainly it's the most sophisticated musical, you know, analytical system I've ever seen. But as musicians,
I know what you're getting at. Yeah. Not everybody listens to music for its attributes. You know, like there are lots of different ways in which you appreciate music. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the musicology. It's because, you know, it was the song at your senior prom, or it was some song that brings back certain memories, and I think people do listen for different things in music. So there's some percentage of music appreciation we capture in Pandora. How much is that? Probably varies by listener. But I think what we're trying to build an engine that comes as close as possible to trying to get at your musical sensibilities as we can, and let your thumbs and your feedback kind of shape it more in your direction. But I think there will always be something missing in how we build playlists because of that ineffable stuff that that people in how people appreciate music. So I think the only measure for how well your playlists are doing is just listeners. Do people listen to it a lot? Do they stay with it for months, weeks, months, years? And does your audience grow? And so far, we feel pretty good about all those metrics. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's the process by which you choose the highly trained musicians to come work for you? And are you hiring?
We're currently not hiring. When we go and expand internationally, we will surely hire, which might be kind of in about a year or so. And they're hired, they take an exam, so you take a music theory exam. And we have, you can imagine a lot of people applying for the job. So, it's based on your kind of a combination of your musical acumen and your ability to hear a song and just understand everything about it quickly. And your your presentation, like, is this someone you'd like to have on your team? A decent human being who would be responsible and work hard and be productive.
And do you guys, how does that, do you function solely from one office, or do you work around the country, or how?
Yeah, our central office is in Oakland, California. We have about 130 employees, and about 90 are in Oakland, and the rest are New York, LA, Chicago, Detroit, Boston. We have offices around the country. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because you're not international, does it limit your international music as well?
That's a good question. No. So the DMCA allows us to play anything that we want. We just can't play it to somebody outside the U.S. What's that? Yeah. Well, I won't go there. Legal problems. When we turned Pandora off, it was really so about a year into the service, when we were serving Beverly Hills all over the world. I got an email from somebody in Serbia who lived in this very small town in the mountains of Serbia, and he wrote in. He was very heartbroken. He was writing in on behalf of him and his other townspeople. There were about 300 people in the town. And he said that for the last however many months, the town had all gotten together every weekend on Saturday night in the one nightclub in town for Pandora night. And Pandora had become like the central social activity of every weekend. And so all the villagers would collect, and they'd each type in some songs and artists to create a mixtape that would then DJ the night. Yeah, doesn't that break your heart? It really, we got a bunch of emails kind of along those lines from people once they got turned off. And this was at a time pretty early in our development when Pandora still was almost exclusively English music. So we hadn't yet branched out in any meaningful way outside of North American catalog. So it just really made me, reaffirm for me how global this thing is. Music respects no geographic boundaries. And we now, since that time, have added, Spanish and Portuguese language music. So we have all the Latin genres and subgenres, Celtic, Cajun, Hawaiian. We have classical music now. We're also now sinking our teeth into Asian Indian music. So Bollywood, ragas, the whole, that whole huge category. And eventually, we plan to have every style of music in the world, and have a decent collection in each one, and be listened to all over the world too. So you type in Norah Jones in your station here, and you'll find the Norah Jones from Iceland, and the next Norah Jones from Zimbabwe. And that's really where we think this can eventually grow. Yeah.
Are you, you said that you're going to go internationally, are you willing, to open offices, around the world, to have the musicians, great music?
Yeah, we probably will have a few pods in different places. Probably, I think East Asian music is going to require local expertise. So I can imagine in Japan probably, or China, we'll have local area experts who are trained in, it's not even a 12-tone scale, it's a very different sort of musical idiom, and I think a Western trained musician just isn't qualified for it, so we'll do things like that. Yeah.
I just kind of have like a listener comment.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I was listening to one of my stations, and like, I found this song that I thought was absolutely awesome, but I couldn't go back to listen to it. So like, is there like on the rise like gonna be like a playlist of like every song you ever listen to like on there, or is that like against like?
No, we could. We don't have that on. That's a gargantuan database is the problem. Did you bookmark it?
No.
That would have been the thing to do right then. It's lost for everybody. Or go back to that station, listen to it for a few days, and see if it comes back. It's still there.
Have y'all ever, or do you plan on doing any live broadcasts? Say, have a band that, say, whatever, 70% of your listeners or 50% or whatever listen to, come in and do like 5 or 6 songs and broadcast those live?
We do a little bit of that in the form of video. So we have a series of concerts that happen at the office that are kind of for office employees more than anything, and we'll record them and broadcast them. But fundamentally as a company, we try to avoid anointing bands. So we don't want to be saying, as Pandora, this is a band you should listen to, that you should like. We really try to stay away from that. It's like why Pandora never publishes sort of our favorites or the top 10, or, we really try to be very neutral in that regard. So when you come on to Pandora, whether you type in, some deep indie band or you type in Neil Diamond, that you feel comfortable. Like Pandora's not saying, nice choice. That we're really kind of, we don't want to have any attitude. I had an email from someone a while ago who wrote a note to me, and he said, I'm really pissed off at you, Tim. You played a Celine Dion song on my Sarah McLachlan station. And so I wrote back and I said, well, was it just not musically relevant? Maybe there was a data issue? And he said, no, the music was relevant, but it was Celine Dion. And I'm assuming you know who Celine Dion is, right? Okay. And then I wrote back and said, we play songs in 3 or 4 song sets typically. And so I wrote back and I said, well, maybe it was in the set, the context of the set, was it disruptive? And he wrote back and said, no, it kind of worked in the set, but it was Celine Dion. And then I wrote back, I tried one more tact, and I said, okay, was it kind of the segue? Maybe it was the songs before and after, and it didn't work just as a segue. And he wrote back and he said, no, the segues are pretty good, but it's Celine Dion. And so I thought I'd given up, and then I got an email from him a little while later, and he said, oh my God, I like Celine Dion. We like to consider that sort of our role, is to sort of not make you feel judged, and maybe let you come to your own conclusions. Yeah.
Do you post any of the analyses for the songs on the site?
This is all we ever show publicly.
Yeah.
A couple more pages and I have to kill everybody in the room, so, yeah.
So the way it works for the people who do these analyses, they do all aspects of the music. Like,
That's right.
So I'm saying, I mean, have you ever? I was just thinking, like, maybe if you specialize with like one person who really, gets and understands like lyrics, and like specialize and like hand it over to this person after you analyze the musical component of it. Like, I don't know. I know that would mean more. You'd have to hire more people to specialize, but like I think that I would just imagine that could get even more in depth when you have one person focusing on just that one aspect.
I think that you're right. I think the problem with that, frankly, is the sanity of the analyst. Like, I actually think that, if you've ever studied Karl Marx, who has this concept of the division of labor, you know about that? Okay, so if you're doing something that specific, like, you'll lose your mind after a while. I mean, you should see somebody after they've done a whole day of heavy metal. Like, it's all they can do to keep it together, And if they were just doing some small part of the song, I just don't think the job would be sustainable. Although I think what you're saying in theory is true, that you'd probably get even more consistency too, because someone would be really focused on one thing. But practically, it's tough. Yeah. Yeah.
I see you have stuff about harmony there with like the chord structure and everything. Does it go like deeper into that, like, you know, like 1-5-1 maybe? Like, do analysts have to know that stuff too?
They do. We don't do chord progressions per se, but when analysts take tests, a typical analyst can chart a song from ear. So you got to know that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
You said you're like a musician first.
Uh-huh.
Then you graduated into the music business. You've been like, really successful. You've done great things. Is there still like any void from leaving the music world, from being a musician to in the music business?
Do I have an emptiness in me now that I'm a businessman?
Or not emptiness, or like, I don't know how that changes.
Yeah.
Taking place, like how that involves your life.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And, you know, I certainly when I graduated from college and throughout my 20s, I never ever imagined, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. You know, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life performing for sure. I went cold turkey when I started Pandora, which was 2000. I literally didn't play piano, I think, at all for like 3 or 4 years. I just completely stopped. And that was from playing it, you know, all the time. And I think partly I was a little burnt at that point. You know, making a living as a musician is really, it can be pretty grueling. And I think I had lost some of the enjoyment as a performer, just the grind of kind of really having to kind of, you know, manage that career and fight for your life as a musician. I think I was a little fatigued, and so the break was actually welcome. And about 5 years into the company, I started getting the itch again. So now I'm back, I'm playing, I'll be doing some recording soon, so I'm getting back into it. But it was a nice, you know, it was a nice break, to be honest. I mean, I played piano in the Holiday Inn. Actually, the lowest point in my musical career, I was playing at the Holiday Inn in the lounge, and some guy walked up to me, he was pretty drunk, and there was a big screen TV behind me, and it showed the football scores on the big screen TV. And he walked up and he said, "Hey dude, can you stop playing? I want to hear the football scores." And I was like, "You know what? You can even," he could see them, but he wanted to hear them instead of hear me play. It's like, you know what? That's the bottom of the barrel. I'm out of this. I'm done with this daily grind here. I'm going to try something else. But so I've been at the bottom of the music barrel for sure. Just a little bit about the marketing side. And how am I doing on time, John?
3 minutes.
Oh, okay. 3 minutes. All right. Where do I want to go then? Maybe I'll just talk about this. So this is a coffee house in Des Moines about 4 months ago, and this is a Pandora town hall meeting. And I've been traveling around the country pretty continuously for the last couple of years. I've had about 200 of these gatherings where we invite local Pandora listeners to get together and just sort of talk about music, talk about Pandora. And the first one I did in New York had 2 people at it. And I did one in New York just a couple months ago where there were 3,000 RSVPs. And this has really been the principal form of marketing, if you want to call it that we've done for Pandora. We've never advertised Pandora at all. We don't spend any money on advertising. We did a little bit of search engine marketing where we buy some keywords on some of the search engines, but we don't do that anymore. We've largely done this by really trying to cultivate relationships and communicate with people who use Pandora. Both over email, we have a team of people who do nothing but correspond. We have 7 people whose only job is to correspond with Pandora listeners. And we're out in the field doing a lot of this sort of in-person meetings. And these things will last like 2 or 3 hours. People are just want to sit and have questions and want to get involved. And I think one of the things that the web has really enabled is, you know, if you build a service that people enjoy, it has an incredibly powerful viral grassroots momentum that you can kind of hitch onto and just sort of buckle your seatbelt. And these are really, you can see in this too, like that guy's got to be, you know, pushing 60. There's some younger people in the crowd, and they have all different, they're all different stripes. They have different musical tastes. He was talking about, he played in World War II, he played in the Navy band. And on Pandora, he was listening to music of like, you know, marches and old big band music. And he was like up there like talking about his stations, and he had some complaints and he had some things to say, you know. And what's really, I think, heartening about this is just like there's this huge diversity, but they all share one thing, which is, you know, incredible passion for music. And we're sitting at like the epicenter of musical passion here. But it's so diverse. And I think for most of these people, what Pandora's done is brought them back to music. And I think most folks, and I think you'll find this after you get out of college, like it gets harder and harder to stay connected to music. You get busy, radio gets less and less relevant for you if it isn't already. And you don't have time, you know, to keep refreshing your iPod or going to the record store for a couple hours. And so you get disconnected. You don't lose your love of it, but you can't find it anymore. And when you get reconnected like this guy does, it's a very powerful thing, and they tell friends about it. So we've been growing on the backs of this incredibly sort of evangelical base of listeners. And you know, we're actually closer to 25 million registered listeners now. We add about 50,000 a day. All entirely by word of mouth. The only site that's grown faster than Pandora is Facebook. And we don't spend any money after it. So music is a pretty powerful tool. And that's kind of our story. So am I done?